king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 226. Lots of swamps and peat. Before the spring plowing started and with the reorganization of officials, Marin ordered Kohler, the newly appointed acting finance minister, to send people to find out the land composition of East Frisia. For example, how much arable land, how many forests, how many grasslands, how many. In addition to sending people to the scene to understand the situation, Kohler also asked Geoffrey for old statistics that the county had collected. After all, the former lords must have done this before. Of course, Marin knew this data in order to plan and adjust the industrial structure. East Frisia did this mainly to facilitate taxation. After all, the rulers of the feudal era were most afraid that their subordinates would conceal the amount of cultivated land and population, because this would lead to the loss of taxes for the rulers. If a country as huge as the Ming Empire wanted to conduct a census of the entire country's population and land, the workload would be huge. However, East Frisia was different. Apart from the semi-independent Jever, the rest of East Frisia only had a total area of about 3,200 square kilometers, which was equivalent to a relatively small prefecture-level city in later China, or the size of 2 or 3 counties. It was very easy to conduct a census in such a small area. So, after a month or so, Kohler handed the report to Marin after referring to the old data. What? Kohler, are you sure? 1/3 of the country's land is swamp. Marin almost lost his balance after reading the report. 33% of the country's land is swamp, isn't it amazing? Previously, when playing Europa Universalis, Marin also played East Frisia as the starting point, and also read the above introduction. In the game, it is shown that the swamp area of East Frisia is close to 40%. Marin obviously does not believe this. Because, if 40% of a country is swamp, wouldn't it be like Liangshan Marsh? It can directly stage water margin. However, the actual data tells Marin that although 40% is not achievable, 33% is still achievable. This is also an important reason why most of the arable land in East Frisia is concentrated in Leer County in the south. Except for Leer County, other counties basically have large swamps in their territory. It is these swamps that divide the central and northern regions of East Frisia into pieces, making it difficult to connect them. Therefore, there are few farmlands in the central and northern regions of East Frisia. In fact, the development efforts are very small. Previously, the reason why Marin was able to exchange all the land on the northern coast for 5,000 ugrams of land was probably because there were too many swamps there. In fact, the plots of land separated by the swamps in the central and northern regions of East Frisia are actually not small in size. Although some plots are surrounded or blocked by swamps, they are also dozens or hundreds of acres. If it were Chinese farmers, they would have settled down in the depths of the swamps and reclaimed wasteland long ago, as long as the government allowed it. After all, dozens or hundreds of acres of land are considered a large area in China. Only wealthy farmers can have so many fields. Moreover, these fields deep in the swamps have abundant fresh water resources and are easy to irrigate. But this is in Europe. If there are no hundreds of acres of flat land, the European lords have no interest in developing it. Because the land yield per unit area in Europe is low, and the serfs also need to keep their own food. Therefore, they think that the development of those swamps is not worthwhile. Moreover, because the swamps are deep and difficult to travel, horses are prone to getting stuck. Therefore, the lords are reluctant to send people deep into the swamps. Therefore, those swamps were basically abandoned. Only in the marginal areas of the swamps, some lords might raise cattle and sheep. However, the breeding was also extensive, and they were not good at storing winter feed. Therefore, before winter, many places would slaughter cattle and sheep on a large scale and pickle the meat with salt. Of course, this is also related to the fact that they do not have enough high-quality forage. Marin introduced alfalfa to the Wadden Islands. If the alfalfa is well harvested and used to feed cattle and sheep in winter, it can ensure that the cattle and sheep do not lose weight. However, if the local wild grass is used to feed livestock in winter, it may cause large-scale malnutrition and even the death of a group of livestock because it is not nutritious enough. Therefore, Europeans simply slaughtered a large number of livestock before winter. Therefore, Europeans in this era had no shortage of salted meat and salted fish, and sausage was a very common food. Sailors would bring a lot of pickled meat with them on long voyages, eat it every day, and not take vitamin supplements, so it would be strange if they didn't get scurvy. However, because everyone slaughtered livestock in batches before winter, there was a lot of pickled meat in the winter market, and the price of meat could not be sold at all. Even during the concentrated slaughter period, the price of meat would fall sharply. Therefore, the small nobles who raised livestock were also very poor and did not make much profit. They were not as good as those nobles who farmed. After all, the nobles who farmed the land planted in spring and harvested in autumn, and the grain would not go bad if it was stored in the warehouse for 2 or 3 years. Marin knew that there were many swamps in the territories of the small nobles on the North Sea. Therefore, he was able to exchange the territories from those lords at a low price. However, he couldn't believe that there were so many swamps in Auric County and Emden County. In fact, there are many swamps in the 2 counties. However, Marin took the highway from Emden County to Auric County. The highway itself chose a route with fewer swamps and was developed along the way, so Marin naturally didn't see many swamps. But in fact, there are also many swamps in these 2 counties. Marin didn't believe it, so he led a large group of people and rode out of the city to see the swamp. Sure enough, when Marin's horse team left the road between Auric and Emden, they soon saw swamps and puddles in the east and west. Looking at so many swamps, Marin murmured to himself, if we drain all the swamp water from this much land, wouldn't it all become fertile fields? Wouldn't I be rich then? Master, this may be difficult. Kohler interrupted, interrupting Marin's why? Why? How difficult is that? Just dig an irrigation canal and pump the water from the swamp into the canal. The swamp will soon dry up. Then, we can turn it into good farmland. Master, digging irrigation canals is not difficult, nor is diverting water. The difficult part is how to drain the water from the swamp pools. If you want to develop swamps, you must not only dig irrigation canals to divert water, but you must also drain all the water from the pools. Otherwise, there will be too much water in the land, and it will still be swamps and cannot be reclaimed into fields. Is it difficult to pump water? It's just a matter of getting a water pump. Marin suddenly stopped talking. He suddenly remembered that this was the Middle Ages, not the modern times, where you could just get a diesel pump to pump water. It would be very, very troublesome, costly, and difficult to drain the water from the swamp pool. Marin got off his horse silently, walked to the edge of a swamp pool, squatted down, grabbed a handful of soil, took a look, and was attracted. It turned out that the soil beside the swamp pool was gray-black. He recognized this kind of soil, because this kind of soil had a name in later generations, called peat. Peat soil, also known as peat or peat, is mainly composed of incompletely decomposed plant residues and completely humified humus and minerals. It is generally generated in swampy areas and develops under conditions of high water content and lack of air. Because it is rich in organic matter, it is considered to be a very high-quality natural fertile soil and can also be used as a natural fertilizer. In his previous life, Marin didn't know what peat soil was at first. However, after he started working, the landlord of the house he rented was a flower lover who liked to plant flowers and plants on the rooftop. When Marin is not working on weekends, he sometimes goes to the rooftop to bask in the sun. If he meets the old landlady who is tending to the flower pots, they can chat. The landlady was a chatterbox, and she liked to chat with Marin for a long time whenever she caught him. Besides talking about family matters, she also taught Marin the knowledge of growing flowers. The old lady is a demolition household, she has many houses and can collect a lot of rent every month. Therefore, she has the leisure to grow flowers and is willing to spend money. For example, ordinary people can just find some soil to grow flowers. But the old lady is particular about quality, and she even bought imported peat soil as flower pot soil, which is very luxurious. Moreover, the old lady is a chatterbox, and she often shows off to Marin, showing him the imported peat soil and even the plastic bag with English words written on it. So, Marin learned about peat soil, and was dragged by the old lady to experience the imported peat soil. It is said that the peat soil bought by the old lady was imported from Ireland. Moreover, Marin also knew that if peat soil can be squeezed tightly for 1 minute when dry and can still spread out after being released, it is high-quality peat soil. These were all taught to Marin by the landlord in his previous life. Seeing the swamp soil that was obviously peat soil, Marin grabbed a handful of dry peat soil and squeezed it tightly. About a minute later, Marin let go and the peat soil slowly spread out. Although it was not top grade, Marin knew that it was also considered high-grade peat soil. Marin looked at these swamps that had existed for tens of millions of years. There seemed to be a lot of peat soil everywhere. Well, it seems that these swamps are not completely useless. If the water is drained, the fertility of the peat soil here can definitely be transformed into excellent farmland. Moreover, peat soil is not only fertile soil for planting, but can also be burned as fuel. In Scotland, it is said that peat is used as fuel to bake germinated barley during the production of Scotch whisky. Although the calorific value of peat is not high, far lower than coal. However, its calorific value is comparable to that of firewood, or even exceeds that of firewood. Therefore, peat is also an excellent fuel. Of course, mining this fuel is not easy and requires going deep into swampy areas. In short, these swamps are not completely useless. The peat soil is very valuable, whether as fertilizer or fuel. Marin even planned to add some peat soil when making dung fertilizer. Chapter 227 Dutch Windmill. When we were in the Wadden Islands, because fresh water resources were very limited, we dug ditches and canals on the islands, and the fresh water was distributed to the farmland along the ditches. Because it is flood irrigation, there is no need to pump water. Moreover, since fresh water resources are limited, once they are dispersed among the ditches of so many cultivated fields, there is no need to worry about waterlogging in the farmland. But it is different on the mainland. East Frisia is located in a low-lying area near the North Sea. Although not as much land as in the Netherlands is below sea level, it is still very close to sea level. This is the lower reaches of many inland rivers flowing into the sea, such as the estuary of the Ems River. Therefore, fresh water resources are extremely abundant here. In addition, the proximity to the sea and the prevailing westerly winds also bring abundant rainfall. So, here, unlike in the Wadden Islands, there is not enough fresh water. Instead, there is too much fresh water. In East Frisia, irrigation is not a problem. The biggest problem is the fear of waterlogging in the farmland. After all, wheat crops cannot be soaked in water. Unlike rice, which requires so much water. But even rice cannot be soaked in water in the later stages. Therefore, drainage is a very big problem in East Frisia, especially in the critical period of summer when crops are growing. If there is too much, the wheat fields will be easily soaked. The reason why agriculture in Lisle County is so developed is that Lisle County is on the Ems River. As long as the drainage ditches are dug to connect to the huge Ems River, the excess fresh water will flow into the Ems River and into the sea. There were many swamps there in ancient times, but they were easier to transform. As long as a few more ditches connecting to the Ems River were dug, the excess water could be drained. Therefore, agriculture there is the most developed. The central and northern parts of East Frisia are difficult to develop because there is no wide natural drainage channel to the sea like the Ems River. If you want to develop swamps into farmland, you must first drain the accumulated water. Therefore, you need to dig ditches and even connect rivers that flow to the sea. Even if the ditch was dug, there still needed to be adequate drainage means. Water pumps were obviously not available in this era, so generally people could only rely on manpower. It seems that there are also many swamps in the Netherlands during this era. The Netherlands. Marin's eyes suddenly lit up. He had read many articles about the Netherlands before, most of which were about football and the sea coachman. However, in the article about the rise of the Netherlands, it was mentioned that the Dutch blocked the sea to create land. Moreover, this did not start in modern times, but began in the late Middle Ages, which is exactly this era. During this era, the Dutch improved the windmills they introduced from Germany and began using them to pump water, draining the accumulated water from low-lying areas and ensuring that areas at sea level would not be submerged by the accumulated water. Windmill pumping water is really a good idea. Marin patted his head. Although there are no diesel engines these days, using windmills is also very good. Although the windmill speed is a bit low and the water pumping speed is also very slow, but the windmill can rotate day and night. As long as there is wind, the windmill will keep turning until it breaks down. Even though the windmill pumps water very slowly, because it keeps turning, the amount of water it pumps in a day and a night is no less than that of a small diesel engine-driven water pump in an hour. East Frisia and the Netherlands are at the same latitude, and both belong to the prevailing westerly belt, with westerly winds blowing all year round. Although the Netherlands faces the sea directly, the wind is stronger, but East Frisia is also by the sea, and the wind is not too small. The use of windmills is just right. As long as the drainage channels are dug, Marin can have people set up Dutch windmills beside the swamp pools to pump water day and night. If the pool is too big, you can set up several windmills to pump water together. In short, the water in these swamp pools must be drained. Only by draining away all the water can the farmland reconstruction plan be facilitated. Otherwise, how can we start the reconstruction in the face of puddles of water of different sizes? Just do it when you think of it. Marin immediately sent people to the Netherlands to find craftsmen who could make windmills and learn how to pump water with windmills. In fact, the Dutch windmills were not needed until the drainage channels were dug. But windmills can do more than just pump water. In addition to being able to pump water continuously, Dutch windmills can also be used to drive large stone mills, windmills, and large rotating saw teeth to build sawmills. They can also make paper. Well, Marin doesn't quite understand this. How does a windmill make paper? However, the information Marin read in his previous life did not introduce this knowledge. But no matter what, the three functions of pumping water, building mills and sawmills are enough to make windmills generate huge economic benefits. Therefore, although windmills cannot be used to improve swamp drainage before drainage channels are dug, it is still possible to build a few windmills, and simple sawmills. Moreover, in the process of building these windmills, the craftsmen invited from the Netherlands certainly took the lead. But Marin could also arrange his own craftsmen to participate in the construction. As long as more windmills were built, the craftsmen arranged by Marin would naturally learn how to make windmills. At that time, these people would take more apprentices, so that many craftsmen would learn how to make windmills. Then, when there were more people who could make Dutch windmills, when Marin started the swamp drainage plan, he could manufacture windmills in large quantities to drain water. As long as the accumulated water is drained, the fertile swamps can be transformed into good farmland. 1/3 of the country's land area. That's thousands of square kilometers. Converted into arable land, 247,000 acres can be reclaimed, equivalent to 123,500 ugrams, or 1.482 million mu. Of course, it is impossible for all of this land to be turned into arable land. There are still many places where houses and roads need to be built, and the irrigation canals also need to be counted in this area. However, no matter what, as long as it is fully utilized, 70,000 to 80,000 ugrams of arable land can still be reclaimed. At present, the entire East Frisia has only more than 80,000 ugrams of arable land. As long as we dig drainage canals, set up a large number of Dutch windmills, and pump water as hard as we can, we will create a large number of fertile fields. Perhaps, this project is extremely expensive, and it is difficult for the nobles who are generally in debt at this time to bear it. But for Marin, who is full of money-making ideas, it is extremely simple. The large-scale transformation of fertile land does not mean that Marin wants to make a fortune by farming. Instead, Marin wants more population. In these days, there are manors with too many people in Germany, so it is not difficult to immigrate. But to immigrate people here, you have to have land for them to farm. And you have to ensure the supply of food. Therefore, Marin wanted to cultivate fertile land not to make money, but to allow East Frisia to bear more population. Only when the population increases can the economy develop vigorously. After all, this is an era without modern machines, and Marin is not a mechanical doctor. It is possible for him to make a simple machine based on the physics knowledge of middle school, but it is beyond his ability to make an efficient and complex machine. Therefore, if you want to improve productivity, you have to rely on a large number of laborers. In short, Marin introduced the Dutch windmill, which not only made it easier for Marin to transform large swamp areas into fertile fields to accommodate more people, but also made it easier for East Frisia to grind flour, and even helped saw wood and build ships. It can be said that he killed two birds with one stone. Chapter 228 Population Exchange. Spring plowing is about to begin, and Marin is ready. The only problem is the fertilizer block. Because of the rush of time, there is still a lot of fertilizer and feces left after being exposed to the sun and wind. The smell is very unpleasant and difficult to cover up. So Marin sent people to the swamp to dig up a lot of peat soil and mixed it with the fertilizer blocks to cover up the smell. However, the stench of feces still could not be covered. In a rage, Marin decided to have the fertilizers applied by the serfs who had the most control over him, and not give them to irrelevant people. In this way, the risk of leaks was greatly reduced. Just as Marin was preparing for spring plowing, the Principality of Clifford suddenly sent an envoy over. In name, the envoys from the Principality of Cleaver came to congratulate Marin on becoming the Earl of East Frisia, and brought a lot of gifts. But those gifts made Marin roll his eyes. The reason was that these heavy gifts were mainly spices such as pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. In theory, John II sent these valuable gifts with full sincerity. However, he had no idea that Marin had 4 ships returning from India, loaded with spices. Moreover, Marin didn't have the habit of dipping his food in pepper. Therefore, the consumption of spices was not that great. However, Marin's cheap father, Old Hoffman, had a strong taste for spices and was somewhat fond of the spices that the nobles consumed in large quantities. Therefore, when eating, Old Hoffman often liked to dip braised pork in pepper, cinnamon and clove powder. Fortunately, Old Hoffman didn't sprinkle a lot of pepper on the dish, otherwise, Marin wouldn't be able to eat it at all. In fact, Old Hoffman really planned to do so. However, not only Marin, but also Lady Mary didn't like to eat directly with spices. So, the matter was abandoned. Clifford's envoy Lannet came this time not only to congratulate Marin on becoming the Earl of East Frisia, but also to ask Marin to return the 28 wandering knights. John II was concerned about his brother. He knew that the structure of the Teutonic Knights was very complicated. Even if Philip became the Grand Master, it would take at least 2 or 3 years to sort it out before he could truly control the Teutonic Knights. This was still good. After all, Prince Philip had received a good education since childhood and was quite smart. If he were a fool, he might have been sidelined by the powerful knights under him. Therefore, John II hoped that the 28 apprentice knights who had participated in Marin's conquest of East Frisia would go to help their brothers. After all, these people had seen blood, and they were different from ordinary wandering knights who had never fought in a war. Moreover, these people had also participated in the training of Marin's army and had experience in training soldiers. This was highly valued by John II. John II admired Marin's military command and training abilities very much, so he hoped to send these 28 trainee knights who had experienced war and been trained by Marin to help his brother. With these trainee knights who had participated in wars and learned to train, it would also be convenient for Philip to quickly control the army of the Teutonic Knights. At least, he could place a large number of confidants in the army. But how could Marin be happy? He had very few educated officers. He treasured these 28 trainee wandering knights. At least, these officers could understand military orders and execute them without any mistakes. Unlike before, Marin promoted many illiterate officers, which resulted in difficulties in conveying military orders. In the beginning, in order to accurately convey the orders, Marin even had to send people to confirm after giving the orders to make sure that the first batch of messengers did not convey the wrong orders. Now, with these 28 people, Marin can directly write the military order by hand and let any soldier ride a horse to hand it to the officer. Moreover, these wandering knights are basically only 18 or 19 years old, more obedient, and can resolutely execute Marin's orders. Those old wandering knights are more experienced, but they also have many ideas of their own and are prone to be smart and modify Marin's orders without authorization. Marin found that Franzberg had many ideas of his own. At the beginning, the two did not cooperate well. The main reason was that Franzberg sometimes insisted on his own opinion and did not trust Marin's guidance. But as time went on, and Marin repeatedly proved that he was right, Franzberg was completely convinced by Marin and completely followed Marin's orders. However, Franzberg was an experienced knight after all, and he still had a lot of ideas. For example, the last time Marin treated those women and children ruthlessly in order to prevent future troubles, it caused Franzberg strong dissatisfaction. Although Franzberg did not express it in person, he still had a grudge about that incident. This also made Marin realize that recruiting ready-made officers, although quick to get started, would not be as obedient as those wandering knights who had just been driven out of their homes. These newly driven wandering knights had almost no social experience and had to learn many things from scratch. This wine left Marin with a lot of room for transformation. As long as they were trained well, these young wandering knights could easily be trained to become Marin's die-hard fans. For example, after the 28 trainee wandering knights had been under Marin for a few months, most of them became Marin's staunchest supporters, and only a few of them were too slippery and difficult to fool. In addition, they had limited abilities and were not able to thoroughly execute military orders, so they were not valued by Marin and were not very loyal to him. Sure enough, after Marin asked the opinions of these 28 people, 22 of them expressed their willingness to stay without hesitation because they recognized and admired Marin and were valued here. The other 6 people were willing to go to the Teutonic Knights because they had many ideas and were not valued. Actually, the 6 people who were leaving were quite capable and smart. They also learned Marin's military training. However, they had an important shortcoming, which was that they were not very obedient and had too many ideas of their own. Having many ideas is a good thing for a scientist, but for a mid-level officer, it can sometimes be fatal. Whether it is a modern army or a contemporary army, a very important requirement for grassroots officers is to resolutely obey orders. Marin was not afraid of his subordinates having ideas. Usually, they could bring up ideas and discuss them. However, once an order was issued, the officer who received the order must strictly execute it, regardless of whether it was right or wrong. Even if the order was to let the officer die at the rear. Therefore, Marin did not think highly of the 6 seemingly smart but not very obedient apprentice knights. Such people might have their own ideas, such as saving strength, during the most difficult and desperate stage. In that case, it would be more fatal. After learning about the ideas of these 28 people, Marin decided to find a way to keep the 22 trainee wandering knights who were willing to serve him. In fact, 15 of these 22 people have been made official knights because of their previous military exploits. There is even one person, the acting 4th Phalanx leader Stade, who was made a hereditary knight. Lonnet, the envoy of the Principality of Cleaver, certainly did not agree to Marin's request to keep 22 wandering knights. He wanted 28 people, but Marin only gave 6, which was too unreasonable. Before, Lonnet and John II thought that might be a few wandering knights willing to stay and serve Marin. However, he did not expect that 22 people would be willing to stay. So, he naturally did not want to. So, Marin decided to exchange something. Originally, Marin was going to throw money at it. However, Marin's eyes were suddenly attracted by a report on the imprisoned former citizens of Emden on his desk. These imprisoned Emden citizens were the family members of the Emden citizens who fought desperately with Marin on the day Marin attacked Emden. In fact, many Emden citizens who resisted Marin that day were still alive and were imprisoned together. Marin was troubled by this group of people and didn't know how to deal with them. If he wanted to avoid future troubles, he should kill them. However, there were 1,600 people in this group, and they were all civilians. If he killed them all, Marin's reputation would be ruined. Before, Marin had reasons to kill those nobles who rebelled. After all, those nobles came to power illegitimately because their ancestors participated in the rebellion, which was legally justifiable. However, these imprisoned citizens were just civilians. According to the moral code of knights, they should not raise their butcher knives against civilians. Of course, like the day when Marin attacked the city, civilians held kitchen knives to stop his army, that situation can be excluded. However, Marin was reluctant to kill the imprisoned civilians because they were unarmed and there were many old, weak, women and children among them. Originally, Marin planned to exile these people to North America in the future. However, when he thought about how the United States came into being, Marin was a little hesitant. You know, the earliest American immigrants were actually Puritans who rebelled against the king and some exiled criminals. It is precisely because of this that later American culture advocates individuality. Their ancestors were all criminals and rebels, how could they not have individuality, and puts profit above all else? Marin didn't want the future colony to get out of control, so it was not a good idea to exile criminals and opponents to North America. Exiling these people to a rich place like North America was not a punishment for them, but a reward for them. Therefore, if you want to exile criminals and rebels, exile them to Africa and deal with black uncles, which is the real exile and punishment. Rich lands like North America, Australia, and Argentina should be handed over to immigrants who are loyal to them to ensure that those colonies will not seek independence in the future. Only places like the African rainforest and the Sahara Desert, where the environment is harsh and the inhabitants are fierce, are good places for criminals and opponents. Basically, every family of this group of citizens has a blood feud with Marin. Therefore, it is impossible for these people to return home. Therefore, it is right to find a way to send them away. But now, due to the lack of ships and sailing talents, Marin has no conditions to send these people overseas. It just so happened that the Principality of Clifford came to ask for people, and Marin immediately decided to send these people to Duke John II of Clifford. Marin felt sorry for these people, because there were many craftsmen among them. After all, in the Middle Ages, the people who could live in the city, except for the nobles and the most lowly coolies, were either craftsmen or merchants. Marin counted that among these 1,600 people, 300 of them were craftsmen. Among them, there were carpenters, leatherworkers, tailors, shoemakers, blacksmiths, stonemasons, bricklayers, bakers, etc. They were all technical talents in the Middle Ages. With them, the economy would be much more active. Unfortunately, they had a blood feud with Marin, so Marin didn't dare to use them. Just then, John II came to ask for people, so Marin decided to exchange these people with John II. These people certainly have a grudge against Marin, but they have no grudge against John II. They can still make a living in John II's territory. Moreover, they can produce a lot of goods and promote the economic development of the Principality of Clifford. Lord Marin, this condition sounds good, but these people are ordinary citizens, and their requirements are very high. Taking them to the Principality of Clifford, just to settle them, will cost a lot. What ordinary citizens? They are all prisoners of war. Now, I will punish them all as slaves and hand them over to your Lord Duke. The citizens in the Middle Ages were very cool. They did not have to bear heavy taxes like serfs, but enjoyed various policy benefits. If the mayor's policies did not suit their wishes, they would dare to point at the mayor's nose and scold him. Because even in the Middle Ages, the mayor and councillors were elected by these citizens. Therefore, citizens are the bosses because they have the right to vote, and even the mayor and town head dare not mess with them. Therefore, Lonnet was very tempted by Marin's proposal to give 1,600 people, including 300 craftsmen, to Duke John, because 300 craftsmen could produce a lot of goods and bring a lot of tax revenue to John II. Moreover, because Prince Philip became the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, John II had a channel to transport large quantities of goods to the Teutonic Knights for sale. But once we have the channels, we still need producers to help us produce low-cost goods. 300 craftsmen can definitely help John II produce a lot of goods that can be traded. The only question is, with what identity should these craftsmen be introduced? If they were introduced as citizens, it would be like hiring 300 uncles. You know, citizens in the Middle Ages were already very cool, and craftsmen were the high-end people among the citizens. Therefore, inviting 300 uncles back would also bring a lot of trouble. When Marin opened his mouth and offered to punish these craftsmen as slaves and send them to John II, Lonnet almost wanted to agree on the spot, because he knew that John II was unlikely to refuse such a good condition. In order to obtain enough goods for trade, John II is now recruiting craftsmen privately. But even so, it is still difficult to recruit. Because medieval craftsmen were all big men, with high salaries and many conditions. John II doesn't want to be as rich as Marin, who can use money to confuse the craftsmen. He can only use preferential policies to recruit those craftsmen. However, preferential policies are difficult to impress those craftsmen. After all, this thing can't see the benefits in a short time, and only people with a long-term vision can discover the benefits. Unlike the gold coins smashed by Marin, it is dazzling to look at, and it is easier for craftsmen to accept. As for the 22 trainee wandering knights, they were nothing to John II. Every year, dozens of wandering knights were driven out of their homes in the Principality of Clever and the Earldom of Mark. Therefore, John II was not short of wandering knights. It's just that John II was anxious to support his brothers, so he wanted to send these wandering knights to the Teutonic Knights. The conditions you, Marin, offered were just what John II wanted. Moreover, these craftsmen were given to him by Marin as slaves, which was really rare. Craftsmen with citizen status were masters, and they could not afford to offend them. But slave craftsmen were purely money-making machines for their masters. As long as the masters fed these craftsmen, would they dare to ask for other treatments? Do you want to be beaten? Lonnet was sure that John II would agree to this condition. However, he did not dare to make a decision on his own and decided to go back and ask John II for instructions. As for Marin, he felt very painful to let go of 300 craftsmen. However, these craftsmen had a blood feud with him, and even if he enslaved them, they would easily rebel. But it was different if they gave it to John II. John II was not the culprit who killed their family, and they had no reason to fight John II to death. Therefore, if they gave it to John II, these craftsmen could focus on production. If they kept it in their own hands, even if they were forced to produce, they might do something bad. For example, they deliberately made the product very bad and wasted Marin's raw materials. Moreover, by using this group of people to exchange for 22 officers who were well-educated and skilled in martial arts, even if Marin suffered a loss, it was not too much. Moreover, he also eliminated the instability factor in Emden. Taking into account the social stability factor, Marin actually did not suffer too much loss. At this stage, Marin's first need is to ensure the safety of East Frisia, followed by economic construction. Therefore, 22 educated officers are what Marin needs most at the moment. As for craftsmen, they are secondary. Besides, as long as there is money, who is afraid of not being able to recruit them? What's more, Marin also plans to establish a technical school in the future to train educated craftsmen on a large scale.